During the early 70s, Marc Bolan was one of the biggest rock stars around. But this isn't the story of Marc Bolan's rock career. This is the story of Marc Bolan's rocker. I was introduced to this horse in 1977 when I was taken to Marc Bolan's office in New Bond Street in London. I was taken there because I was in a band that was being put together by Herbie Flowers, who was Marc Bolan's bass player at the time. And as a T.Rex fan, I really couldn't believe that there I was in the office, stood in front of this horse with a few of my friends who were in the band, and watching what was going on in the office. I remember Jeff Dexter being there at the time, quite busy on the telephone. Some of the history of the horse is outlined in this letter that I received from Jewett Perrin. Jewett was given the horse by Tony Howard, Marc Bolan's manager, after Marc Bolan died, and it outlines quite a lot of the story of how Jewett was working for Pink Floyd, who were housed in the same office as Marc Bolan's office at 69 New Bond Street, and how he would go and talk to Tony Howard every now and then and had admired the horse and then eventually was given it. It's a very interesting story. In his letter, Jewett explains that he was working as copyright and royalties manager for Pink Floyd music publishers, and that in the same building there was Marc Bolan's management, there was Pink Floyd management, and Rock Music Co Limited, who are publishers of Hawkwind, The Damned and Kokomo, amongst others. He goes on to say that Steve O'Rourke, who was the Pink Floyd manager, wanted to leave the building because the rent was becoming prohibitive and it wasn't needed anymore, and that meant that everyone else needed to move out of the building as well. Tony Howard, who had basically been left with no star to manage since Marc's death, offered the horse to Jewett. As long as he paid £100, had to get the horse out of the office within 2 weeks, when it had to be vacated. Jewett had intended to keep the horse for if or when he ever had children, but that didn't happen, and he emigrated to Australia, and that's when he needed to sell the horse himself. So that's when I became the lucky owner. Somewhere along the line, the horse had received a little bit of damage, just some chips in the paint in a few places and some pen marks. It has now been carefully restored by a specialist carousel horse restorer. A good 95% of the horse is exactly as it was when it resided in Marc Bolan's office, and with the small amounts of restoration work, it looks absolutely glorious. So I certainly think, and I'm sure that many Marc Bolan fans would agree, that this rocking horse is a very important part of the stable of Marc Bolan artefacts.